Welcome to The Scientist, a new podcast under the umbrella of the Into the Impossible brand. I'm your host, Brian Keating, the Chancellor's Distinguished Professor of Physics at UC San Diego. And each week on The Scientist, I dive into the life and legacy of a legendary scientist, an experimentalist, a theorist, an observer, all of them uncovering insights you can apply to your own work and your own worldview. Science didn't appear fully formed. It was built by real people, solving real problems under pressure with very human desires. Their ideas still shape our future. We'll examine not just what they discovered, what drove them to make those discoveries, and most importantly of all, who they were, from their obsessions and honors to their most spectacular ideas, their most brilliant blunders, and their most beautiful of all human flaws.
Imagine a world with no up, no down, just length and width, no height. A flat, silent plane where geometry is destiny and thinking in 3D is blasphemy. Welcome to Flatland. It's not just a story of math. It's a Victorian epic era, a science fiction fantasy, a red pill for physicists. It's the allegory that put the theory of geometric unification into string theory 7 decades before string theory was even a glimmer in its creator's eyes. It's the mirror maze that Einstein stared deeply into, and today we're diving deep as we can into the Flatland. But first, why would a novel written from 1884, written by a schoolmaster, still blow physicists' minds today? And why do I give it out to everyone who subscribes to my Monday Magic mailing list on my website at briankeating.com/list? You'll actually get a copy of it emailed to you. Einstein didn't read Flatland once. He devoured it, reading it again and again because it taught him something that equations alone could not. Imagine being so trapped in your own world that the very concept of up was heretical. That was Flatland. It's a fictional universe where you, the narrator, are a square, literally. Your name is a square. Society is geometry, and discovering an extra dimension gets you locked away as a schizophrenic madman. But what if this weird little book from 1984 wasn't just satire? What if it was a user manual for future physicists? Because here's the truth. Einstein used it to teach relativity, string theorists use it to visualize 10 dimensions, and every physicist you've ever admired has at some point been a flatlander trying to escape from the plane. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes we're going to explore and unlock the dimensional imagination that helps some of the greatest obsessive geniuses in history see the shape of space-time itself. And the ending, well, it's not just about some square. It's about you. Part 1. The two-dimensional universe of obedience. Okay, so this book is written by Edwin Abbott Abbott. Yes, they doubled down. They squared his name. He's an English theologian, a headmaster, and a polymath. In 1984, he wrote Flatland, subtitle A Romance of Many Dimensions. On the surface, it's a fable, a science fiction fantasy, a geometrical fable, but underneath, it's a mathematical rebellion, a sociological scalpel, and a physics prophecy. Here's the premise. You are a square. That's your name, capital S square. You live in Flatland, which is a two-dimensional world. You can't look up or down perpendicular to the plane of existence. Those ideas, those dimensions to you and others do not exist. They're forbidden, locked off permanently. All you know is forward, backward, left, and right. The catch? Your social class is literally the number of sides your polygon shape possesses. Squares have 4. Triangles are of a lower class. They're violent and dumb. They only have 3 sides. They're soldiers. Squares, that's you, are part of the middle class, the bourgeoisie, if you will. Pentagons, hexagons, and so on level up their way to the elite. Oh, and circles with infinite number of sides, if you will. They're the high priest of society. And women, they're not even two-dimensional. They're lines, infinitely thin, and to a square, they're regarded as dangerous. So they're kept away, locked in rooms, lest they might pierce the polygonal shapes of the men that drive society. Now, Abbott was writing satire in the late 1800s, but he wasn't disguising it in metaphors. He disguised it in a mathematical Euclidean metaphor so Victorian censors wouldn't ban him outright. In Flatland, your shape is your destiny, and any deviation is treasonous. Part 2. The heresy of height. Everything changes when one day the square is visited by a sphere. What? This globular blob arrives in Flatland, not all at once, but in slices of perception. First, he appears as just a dot, then a glowing circle with no boundary in sight. But then, as his midpoint, his equator, passes through the plane of Flatland, he shrinks, smaller and smaller, circle's diameter decreasing, and shrinking until all of a sudden, all at once, he's gone. To the 2D beings of Flatland, it's supernatural, but it's not magic. It's a result of dimensional ignorance. And it might be something we, too, are guilty of in our inability to grasp higher dimensional realities, such as those presented by possible theories of everything like string theory. So, as Square, the narrator, wonders how can an object, a being, grow and shrink, always remaining perfectly, infinitely sided, and then disappear without moving? The only way he can, is realized, is if he's not bound by your dimensions. We'll be right back after this short break. The sphere tries to explain these objects and the people and these inhabitants of Flatland have other properties. They have luminousness, they have cognition, they dwell in houses, they consume, and they construct a civilization that knows no third dimension. Now, the square at first can hardly process what he's seen. He fights, he refuses, he goes through the stages of grief, but then eventually he believes. But the problem is, he's alone. Like Galileo before the Inquisition, which happened a mere 250 years before this book was written, the square starts preaching the truth. And like Galileo, he's silenced. Flatland society isn't just blind to three dimensions, it's hostile to it. And of course, Flatland is leaving breadcrumbs, if you will, a blueprint to understand relativity. For us spacelanders, for us three-dimensional creatures, to appreciate and apprehend four dimensions, we can benefit from the square's apprehension of three dimensions. Einstein was born 5 years after Flatland was published. But physicists for the next century would use Abbott's metaphor to describe four specific things. Time as the fourth dimension, curvature of that unified four-dimensional space-time, later, extra dimensions in string theory, and fourth, the multiverse so-called brains in the so-called M theory or membrane theory. Now, other books we're going to encounter in the series that I've had the desire and passion and ability to read over these 4 decades of my scientific upbringing with the greatest minds in history as my teachers. We'll talk about these ideas and how influential they were to people like past guest Lisa Randall and past guest Brian Greene. Lisa wrote Warped Passages, and Brian, of course, wrote The Elegant Universe, one of the most popular books celebrating its 25th anniversary. and even Carl Sagan's famous Apple demo on Cosmos. We'll get to Carl Sagan's biography, which is very contentiously written by Kay Davis about 25 years ago, soon after he passed. It's not appreciated by the past guest on the show, Ann Druyan, or her daughter, who's also a guest, Sasha Sagan. We'll cover all those books in our Obsessive Mind series. But we are just flatlanders trying to understand a higher dimensional reality. It wasn't just for the square, it's for us. It's not a metaphor. It's physics at its core. The fourth part of this book is the philosophy of dimensional ignorance. Flatland is also an epistemological bomb. How do we know what exists? What are the limits of perception? How do we distinguish delusion from higher dimensional truth? Abbott Square didn't lack intelligence. He lacked a conceptual vocabulary for up. Just like today's humans, no matter how bright they are, lack the conceptual vocabulary to describe five-dimensional string vibrations. Or, as you'll encounter on my other channel, Professor Keating's experiments, we're going to talk a lot about Chern-Simons actions, which are topological gadgets that link together geometry with property of mathematics called holonomy and more. And the best part is these are observables that have been witnessed and even for which have been awarded Nobel Prizes. Can we imagine taste? The 5 different types of taste as a dimension, our senses as dimension. Even consciousness could be a type of dimension. Philosophers sometimes call this a category error. You're asking flat questions in a spherical reality. The fifth part of the book gets into the social dimension. And there's obviously a subtext. Flatland is a critique. Flatland is also a critique of gender oppression. It's a roast of the British class hierarchy that extended to the subcontinent of India and, of course, to Africa and other colonies. But at its heart, it's a warning about the intellectual elite, the orthodoxy. We see that now in our academic institutions that are being attacked from without and from within. And I see that firsthand here within the ivy-ensconced walls, actually the palm tree-ensconced walls of the University of California. Abbott saw how societies enforce dimensional conformity and what that represents literally and metaphorically. Don't look up. Don't think outside the box. Stay in your plane, not in your lane. So, does that sound familiar? Every revolution begins with a shapeshift, a change. Those that see more than often are treated as criminals at first, outcasts, not as prophets. From Galileo to Vera Rubin, every scientific rebel that we'll encounter, including my first guest, Freeman Dyson, was once a type of dimensional heretic. So where are we still, us flatlanders? When physicists refuse to engage with philosophers? When string theory becomes doctrine instead of conjecture? When academics build walls, siloing themselves instead of bridges? Not only between themselves, but between the public at large who pay our salaries. I gave this warning months ago in my Magic Monday mailing list that when we treated the public as just a reliable source of income without giving back to them, without providing things like this, I have to say, not tooting my own horn, but giving back at no profit to myself, such that you who pay my salary can benefit from the discoveries that your hard-earned money and tax dollars have enabled. Flatland was a warning that maybe gave me a glimpse, but it's from more than a century before I actually read it. So the frontiers that we always are seeking but never achieving in physics is not math. It's imagination. So what is more real? What you can measure or what you can conceive? The square saw a literal shadow of truth, and for that was exiled from his reality, his domain, and his society. But you have the sphere's story. You see what squares and triangles could not. But can you see beyond? Beyond our three-dimensional existence? What will you do to peer into a new reality? Einstein once said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the three-dimensional world. I don't know about you, but if I'm going under the knife in surgery, as I recently did for a torn ligament in my meniscus in my knee, I certainly didn't want my surgeon to have all that much imagination and creativity. I wanted him to have knowledge, and he did, and I'm feeling much better. But Einstein said this in part for with poetic license, but he also meant it. Before the tensor calculus, before the field equations, before the contractions and dilations, he asked a question that Abbott taught us how to ask. What does the world look like from another dimension? That's Flatland. Einstein read it not to laugh or to poke fun at the Victorian mindset of just a few decades before his birth, but to train his mind, to imagine motion as curvature, to imagine time as space, to see past what was visible and create what was true. So let's tie the loop. Flatland isn't fiction. It's protophysics. It's what happens when you take curiosity seriously and let it mutate into genius. You clicked this episode because of Einstein, perhaps. So here's the payoff you've been waiting for. Before he discovered space-time, Einstein had to learn to see the world like a square visited by a sphere. That's the lineage. That's the legacy. That's the inheritance. And guess what? Now it's yours. This episode shifted your dimensional perspective, even by a mere fractional dimension. Please share it with somebody who still thinks in 2 dimensions. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening or watching the audiogram. Leave a review, leave a comment, and stay curious. Next week, we're going to be looking into some of the cosmologists who studied the hidden matter that matters lurking in the cosmos. Until then, don't just look forward. Don't look back. Look up. It's your privilege. It's your right.
And this is The Scientists on the Into the Impossible Podcast Network.
And now enjoy this video of Carl Sagan explaining perspectives on Flatland as only the great communicator Carl Sagan could do.
In discussing the large-scale structure of the cosmos, astronomers sometimes say that space is curved, or that the universe is finite but unbounded. Whatever are they talking about? Let's imagine that we are perfectly flat. I mean absolutely flat. And that we live, appropriately enough, in Flatland, a land designed and named by Edwin Abbott, a Shakespearean scholar who lived in Victorian England. Everybody in Flatland is, of course, exceptionally flat. We have squares, circles, triangles, and we all scurry about, and we can go into our houses and do our flat business. Now, we have width and length, but no height at all. Now, these little cutouts have some little height, but let's ignore that. Let's imagine that these are absolutely flat. That being the case, we know, us Flatlanders, about left-right, and we know about forward-back, but we have never heard of up-down. Let us imagine that into Flatland, hovering above it, comes a strange three-dimensional creature which, oddly enough, looks like an apple. And the three-dimensional creature sees an attractive, congenial-looking square, watches it enter its house, and decides in a gesture of interdimensional amity to say hello. Hello, says the three-dimensional creature. How are you? I am a visitor from the third dimension. Well, the poor square looks around, his closed house, sees no one there, and what's more, has witnessed a greeting coming from his insides, a voice from within. He surely is getting a little worried about his sanity. The three-dimensional creature is unhappy about being considered a psychological aberration, and so he descends to actually enter Flatland. Now, a three-dimensional creature exists in Flatland only partially. Only a plane, a cross-section through him can be seen. So when the three-dimensional creature first reaches Flatland, it's only the points of contact which can be seen, and we'll represent that by stamping the apple in this ink pad and placing that image in Flatland. And as the apple were to descend through, slither by Flatland, we would progressively see higher and higher slices, which we can represent by cutting the apple. So the square, as time goes on, sees a set of objects mysteriously appear from nowhere and inside a closed room and change their shape dramatically. His only conclusion could be that he's gone bonkers. Well, the apple might be a little annoyed at this conclusion, and so, not such a friendly gesture from dimension to dimension, makes a contact with the square from below and sends our flat creature fluttering and spinning above Flatland. At first, the square has no idea what's happening. He's terribly confused. This is utterly outside his experience. But after a while, he comes to realize that he is seeing inside closed rooms in Flatland. He is looking inside his fellow flat creatures. He is seeing Flatland from a perspective no one has ever seen it before to his knowledge. Getting into another dimension provides as an incidental benefit a kind of X-ray vision. Now our flat creature slowly descends to the surface, and his friends rush up to see him. From their point of view, he has mysteriously appeared from nowhere. He hasn't walked from somewhere else. He's come from some other place. They say, "For heaven's sake, what's happened to you?" And the poor square has to say, "Well, I was in some other mystic dimension called up." And they will pat him on his side and comfort him, or else they'll ask, "Well, show us, where is that third dimension? Point to it." And the poor square will be unable to comply. But maybe more interesting is the other direction in dimensionality. What about the fourth dimension? Now, to approach that, let's consider a cube. We can imagine a cube in the following way. You take a line segment and move it at right angles to itself in equal length. That makes a square. Move that square in equal length at right angles to itself, and you have a cube. Now, this cube, we understand, casts a shadow. And that shadow we recognize. It's, ordinarily drawn in third grade classrooms as two squares with their vertices connected. Now, if we look at the shadow of a three-dimensional object in 2 dimensions, we see that, in this case, not all the lines appear equal. Not all the angles are right angles. The three-dimensional object has not been perfectly represented in its projection in 2 dimensions, but that's part of the cost of losing a dimension in the projection. Now, let's take this three-dimensional cube and project it, carry it through a fourth physical dimension. Not that way, not that way, not that way, but at right angles to those 3 directions. I can't show you what direction that is, but imagine that there is a fourth physical dimension. In that case, we would generate a 4-dimensional hypercube, which is also called a tesseract. I cannot show you a tesseract because I and you are trapped in 3 dimensions. But what I can show you is the shadow in 3 dimensions of a 4-dimensional hypercube or tesseract. This is it. And you can see it's 2 nested cubes, all the vertices connected by lines, And now the real tesseract in 4 dimensions would have all the lines of equal length and all the angles right angles. That's not what we see here, but that's the penalty of projection. So you see, while we cannot imagine the world of 4 dimensions, we can certainly think about it perfectly well.